Clemson is number one for the first time since 1981. Do the Tigers do what that team did, or does Florida State remind them of who owns the ACC? Miami Duke, what can we say? Great play, crazy play, or should it have been no play? This is ACC Breakdown. It's a Wednesday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is your place to be if you want to talk some ACC football. We've got the best bloggers in the conference joining us, Brittany Taylor Newman from Football.com. And also, for the first time, welcome Robert Reinhard from Blogger So Dear on the Wake Forest platform for SB Nation. So, welcome you two. Thanks so much for bailing me out. We had a third, but we'll make it. We'll have a nice discussion here, plenty to talk about. So, really, anything other than Duke and Miami that comes to mind from last weekend, or do we dive straight into this craziness? What do you think, Brittany?
I can't think about anything except for Duke Miami still. It's been days. That was definitely the most exciting end that we saw to a game last weekend. You know, we kind of joked last week. We talked about Florida State and Georgia Tech and how ridiculous of a weekend that was, or end to a game, and how each weekend has sort of brought about a circus ending. Well, the ACC got to start again last weekend with that ridiculous Miami Miracle or debacle in Durham. I guess you get to pick your title.
You've got some good ones there, Brittany. I like that.
I can't take credit for making those up. It depends which team you follow, which title you use.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it out there, Robert. Duke, Miami, your take on the play. Obviously, had the players' knee not been down, something I doubted until I saw a still photo that pretty much confirmed it. That was one of the craziest plays, maybe the craziest play I can remember going back to Cal Stanford, which might be a little bit before your time. I don't know for sure. But anything you take from that game, the aftermath, the decision made by the ACC considering what discipline was handed to the officials, or anything else last weekend?
Yeah, I mean, college football continues to be the gift that keeps on giving. A lot of wild endings, 2 back-to-back weeks in the ACC, and then Michigan State just a few weeks ago. But, you know, regarding that play, it is what it is. It's unfortunate as far as Duke is concerned. But, you know, to be honest, they played horrific defense on that play. If we're being completely honest with ourselves, pretty lackadaisical. You know, I understand the frustrations, but, you know, I can't exactly imagine losing on a play like that. But one thing I really worry about for them, and we can talk about this later, is, you know, there's all this talk about trying to reverse the decision of the game, and yeah, there's no precedent for that. And I think, you know, to be honest, I think that's ridiculous. Is really, you know, getting past this game and not letting it beat them twice. And they have a very difficult matchup this week against North Carolina. So, you know, they can say they got screwed by the refs all they want, and you know what, they're probably correct when they say that. But they lost. It knocked them down in the Coastal Division race, and now they just have to live in the reality where they are now.
So, Robert, I like the points there. Number one, Duke can complain about what happened, and maybe justifiably so. Yes, how do you allow a team to run the ball back 95 yards? You had them pinned down to like the 3-yard line at one point in that play, and your season's on the line. You are undefeated in the ACC. You're in first place, and this is the play. You know that you need to stop this guy. You win the game, and it just didn't seem like there was a whole lot of effort there. I know it's difficult to stand back and make that kind of analysis. The other side of this, and you brought this up, and I want to make sure I've got your opinion clear here, is you say it's ridiculous to go back and try to change this decision.
Yes, I'm not a believer that the call should be retroactively overturned. You know, I hate to use the slippery slope argument, but it is a slippery slope. Once the teams leave the stadium, I think that's when it has to be done. If they need to take 10 to 15 minutes to look at the replay, whatever it is, to get the decision, that's fine. But they made a decision, and they have to stand by it. They've since suspended the officials, which, you know, doesn't do much for Duke, but they've done what they can do at this point.
Bottom line, Robert, I'm right there with you. So if this could be made, this decision, in a vacuum, and not be let out to go crazy and people to take this precedent and go wild with it, I think, okay, it's the final play of the game, and we know that nothing would have occurred after it, that the decision on the game outcome could be made, and Duke awarded the win. But you're right. It would open up all sorts of things beyond that, and that's why you got to stay with the decision on the field and after the replay. Okay, Brittany, if I remember correctly, you cited for the Michigan State game as the final play as crazier than Georgia Tech and Florida State. Now, you better stop talking about this, because I don't know what's going to happen this week based on you setting us up for another play and then another play.
I know. Well, if you look at college football as the gift that keeps on giving, maybe you want me to keep talking.
Good stuff.
I guess it depends how you look at it. But yeah, and what's tricky about this is that, you know, knowing what we know now, this didn't end up being a valid touchdown. So I don't know how you rank it, considering the validity of it now. I mean, if this had counted, if they had literally thrown that many laterals and made it into the end zone, and we hadn't seen the snapshot of the player's knee down, and you know, there were some other missed calls, but obviously that was the big one, then I think this definitely would take the cake as even crazier than that. But it kind of spoils the fun a little bit that we know now that it's not really a valid touchdown. But, I mean, who knows what will happen this weekend? Maybe I shouldn't make any predictions at all.
And that in future generations, future years, may make the argument even more interesting, because it technically does count and it's a win for Miami, but we all know that it should not have counted.
Exactly. It did, but it kind of didn't.
All right, Brittany, we'll stay with you and talk about these Clemson Tigers. According to the College Football Playoff Committee, they are the best team in college football. I am not going to argue with that. I was thinking about these rankings, and I look at this a completely different way. I look at merit and resume versus who's the best. So those aren't necessarily the same lists for me. For me, it's okay, if I got to put my mortgage down on a team or 4 teams, then I want Alabama out there. I want Ohio State. I want Clemson and LSU. So I think they nailed it. But I look at merit, I automatically eliminate Alabama, because I think they need to earn it, while other teams have stayed unblemished. And then if they're really not that good, they're going to eventually lose a game. So just your reaction to Clemson. And then, of course, Florida State, let's not count them out, because, wow, this likens itself to Ohio State, who was also number 16 in the initial standings last year, had a bad loss on its resume. And then, of course, we know what happened after that.
Yeah, the top 4 has been a little bit of an argument, especially with Alabama added in there. I had Clemson as my number 1, sort of in my predictions for the week heading into Tuesday night. I like that pick at number 1. I like it a lot. I am very much on the fence about Alabama. I thought what was interesting is that we really saw that the committee placed emphasis. We know they're placing emphasis on strength of schedule. We know that. We've been talking about that for 2 years, but you kind of saw them place emphasis on strength of record as well, and how much teams were winning by outside of the ACC. I think that's why you see the Alabama-Florida flip, because Florida, before toppling Ole Miss, had beat 2 low-tier SEC teams by combined 6 points. So they were looking at how much did you win by, what was the quality of those wins. I saw that at play. So I like the Clemson pick at number 1. I think it's definitely exciting for the Tigers. It's exciting for the conference, because heading into this season, earlier on ACC Breakdown, we were talking about the possibility of the ACC being left out of the playoff. So to have a team ranked at number 1 the very first weekend, that's exciting for ACC fans for sure. The trickiest part of all of this, as you just alluded to with the Florida State, Ohio State comparisons, is that there is so much football left to be played still. And so much can happen. I mean, starting with this weekend, when you've got the 2 top ACC teams facing off, and what happens if Florida State somehow upsets Clemson? Do we then go back to a scenario where the ACC might not be able to make it in because we're looking at a 1-loss ACC leader coming out of the conference championship game? So it's interesting. I'm not getting too riled up about anything yet, because November has a way of eliminating everyone that we think is going to end up being in the playoff anyways.
I like it. I don't like the comment that I hear out there, so don't take any offense if either one of you have made it, that everything works itself out. I don't agree with that because last year we had Ohio State, TCU, and Baylor at the end, and of course it works itself out. There's a decision made, so I don't know if that's working itself out. It's kind of like saying, if I don't make any decisions in life, my life's going to work itself out. Well, we all die at the end, so it worked itself out. So
leave it to you, Mark, to find a way to bring depth into college football.
I don't know where I'm going with that, but Robert, I do want you to take note that Brittany threw us a shameless plug in saying earlier on ACC Breakdown, so all those people out there, they obviously go back and watch and make great use of their time by watching previous episodes. So, Robert, your initial thoughts about the college football playoff rankings, wide open in terms of any conference or specifically with the ACC?
Well, I hate to make the comment that things work themselves out, so I won't exactly say that. Though I will add, I'm looking at number 2 LSU, number 4 Alabama. They play each other this weekend, so that will probably sort itself out a little bit, and a lot of football left to be played, as you mentioned. But Florida State at 16 is interesting if you want to make the comparison to Ohio State last year. And I won't necessarily say this will happen, but yes, they had a fluke loss, a fluke ending, I should say. They did not play that well, so it's not necessarily a fluke that they lost. But they're as talented as almost anybody else in the country. So you could easily see them winning out the ACC. I know they're I'm not going to pick them to beat Clemson. They're about a 12-point underdog. They're in a very difficult environment, but they certainly have the talent to do so. So if they can get a victory over number 1 Clemson, they still have a formidable game against NC State, and they have a really strong opponent in Florida at the end of their season in the non-conference, and then they would have the ACC championship game against a fringe top 25 opponent. Would that be enough to get them into the Final Four? I do not know, but that makes for a wild scenario later on in the year. I will say that.
I've got to think that a one-loss ACC champion, whether it's Clemson or Florida State especially, and even think North Carolina's not even in these rankings, but if they run the table, they're 12-1 and having defeated either Florida State or Clemson in the ACC championship game, I have to think that Florida State, which I cannot remember the last time Florida State was almost a 2-touchdown underdog, would be able to make it, especially since Ohio State, they were beaten soundly by Virginia Tech last year.
Yeah.
They could say, yeah, it was fair and square. It wasn't like there was a controversial ending, but craziness had to happen for us to lose this game. But first is first, and they have to go to Clemson and try to win that game. So let's talk about that, Robert. Let's continue on the path of Clemson and Florida State because they're the two ACC teams in the college football rankings, and lo and behold, they play this week in Clemson. So your thoughts about Florida State possibly missing Everett Golson as they did last week, Dalvin Cook banged up as well, having to go to Clemson, and the metrics tell us the best team in the country.
Yeah, they do not have an easy task at their hands this Saturday. It's unbelievable, as you said, that Florida State, who is used to being a multiple touchdown favorite against almost anybody they have faced over the years, and winning so many consecutive ACC games is not just an underdog, but a double-digit underdog at Clemson. Clemson has by far the biggest advantage at quarterback. You could argue they have an advantage at quarterback against anybody they would play in the country. But Florida State does arguably have the best tailback in the country, potentially even better than Fournette in Dalvin Cook, though he's not necessarily 100%, but he did take some time off against Syracuse, so we'll see how that gets worked out. Quarterback position, I think you can make the argument that McGuire is actually a better quarterback, so it will be interesting to see who Jimbo gives the nod to. And then, they have skill position players who are 5-star recruits who could get it done. But they're going to have to score a lot of points on Clemson. One thing we saw in the North Carolina State-Clemson game this past Saturday was that Clemson got punched in the mouth, and they responded. They got punched in the mouth again, and then they just took over the game. So that was really impressive to me by Clemson, and that, even if we see an initial onslaught from Florida State on Saturday, Clemson's more than capable of responding and still emerging victorious.
Okay, Robert, I'm not begging for people to tune us out a few minutes from now, but I want you to prepare your best 30 seconds to 60 seconds on Wake Forest. Because I care. I want to hear it. And you're really not that bad. You've played some close games against some decent teams. So I want to hear a little bit about Wake Forest a little bit later. But now we're going to hit you up, Brittany, on Clemson and Florida State. So it's crazy that this has been the matchup for the last several years, the matchup. The other division aside, it's been kind of a de facto ACC championship game. Florida State's owned it, even when it appears as though Clemson's been ready to take the mantle. And now Florida State's such an underdog, but it seems as though there's still that barrier for Clemson, and we're going to see what happens Saturday night.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the last 6 years, the winner of this game has gone on to win the conference. So it kind of has become that game that's a good predictor, almost the way that some of the later rivalry games are in other conferences. This in-division game ends up determining who the conference champion's been because Florida State and Clemson have been such strong contenders in the ACC. What's interesting to me is that we're here in the beginning of November, and we have a little bit of, I guess you would call it a quarterback controversy or perhaps more of a quandary. But it's really interesting to me because last year, this game, Florida State against Clemson at Doak Campbell, was the game where Jameis Winston was suspended and Sean McGuire played, and Florida State ended up beating Clemson in overtime. And I grabbed his stats actually from that game before we came on air. He went 21 of 39 for 304 yards for a touchdown. His long pass of the evening was 74 yards. Those are almost exactly the same stats that he had last week against Syracuse, which is the 115th ranked defense in the country. He went 23 of 35, 348 yards, 3 touchdowns, so better on touchdowns. Long was 75 yards as opposed to 74 yards last year. So I think if I was a Florida State fan, I know there's a lot of people that are saying Sean McGuire might be the guy to send out on the field because he's done this against Clemson before. But I'm surprised, actually, comparing the stats in that game last year at home this year against Syracuse with such a bad defense that we didn't see a stronger performance from him. Where it might end up helping them a little bit, Everett Golson is a little bit more mobile, quick on his feet. He's really great with those short passes. Sean is better with the long ball, and Clemson's pass defense, especially in short yardage situations, is really, really good. So if Florida State finds themselves in a situation where Dalvin Cook isn't playing, because we still don't have confirmation if Dalvin Cook will actually be back. He practiced this week. We don't know if he'll be back. So if Dalvin Cook is not playing, Mario Pender is still out. Your run game is a little bit more limited. You may need more yards in the air with those long touchdown passes. So Sean McGuire could help you there. But it's really interesting because I think it's a definite question. I don't know that Everett Golson was meeting with doctors today, and Jimbo Fisher was going to make a decision after that. But I think there's a question, even if Everett Golson is cleared by doctors, I think that there's a case to be made on both sides about why which quarterback could be the best one heading into this game Saturday night. Either way, it's going to be difficult because Death Valley is so loud. So that's not an easy environment to play in as a quarterback. But personally, I kind of see both sides of that case. I don't know that there's a definitive reason to choose Golson just because he's cleared medically.
Yeah, and I think Clemson's been hurt downfield in the passing game by a few teams this year. Jacoby Brissett definitely, although he's the dual threat guy, definitely had success downfield as North Carolina State scored 41 points against Clemson. On the other hand, the Tigers have 2 exceptional corners, especially Mackenzie Alexander on the outside. And even though we've left this topic, I want to see the raised eyebrows. My top 4, again, based on resume, not who I think are the 4 best teams. LSU number 1, Clemson number 2, Michigan State number 3, Iowa number 4. All right.
First it was guess, now it's Iowa. What next? I'm just kidding.
That's an opinion.
Houston. Let's talk about those Houston Cougars. They're undefeated too. Throw them in.
Oh.
All right. Before we dive into this week's games, and we have not mentioned Duke, North Carolina, and that is huge. We will get to it in just a second. Robert, I got to hear about Wake Forest. The Demon Deacons, 20-19. They could have upset Louisville last week at home. Earlier this year, Florida State, I know, is not a offensive juggernaut like they've been in the past, but still, that was a very close game that you played. The BC game, I don't know if BC's offense is any better than a typical high school offense, but still, clamp them down at 3-0 and win that game. You got a decent football team. Are you optimistic about the future of Wake football?
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about Wake Forest football. I promise not to take too much time. I'm very optimistic about it. I think Dave Clawson's an excellent coach, won a MAC championship at Bowling Green, established a foundation for a national championship at Richmond, won a conference championship when he was at Florida. He's won a conference at Fordham, won a conference championship everywhere he's been. Next year is year 3. Our offense is currently this year is composed of pretty much entirely true freshmen, redshirt sophomores. We bring it all back. The defense, very young in the defensive line and in the secondary. And our schedule gets dramatically easier next year. We have non-conference against Delaware, at Indiana, but Tulane and Army at home, and then home games against UVA, Syracuse, BC. Clemson's going to be a tough one, and then road games against Louisville, NC State, Duke, and Florida State. So next year will be the definite measuring stick of Dave Clawson, and I think Wake Forest should finally return to a bowl game next year. And he's had the highest rated recruiting class in school history last year, and another strongly rated class so far this year. So I'm excited about the future.
So you're not going to let us know where that highest rated recruiting class of all time actually ranked?
Well, it was about 50th, to be honest with you. But I will say the one recruiting class that we had, it was very low on paper, did produce several NFL players in Aaron Curry and Alfonso Smith. But that was years ago. That was years ago. But yeah, I mean, it's not like we're out there getting 5 stars. None of our guys are going to be on National Signing Day picking hats. But we just got to get quality players and then redshirt them and then develop them.
Yeah, to be fair, it's not like they were rating recruiting classes in 1950. This is a pretty recent exercise. All right, we've talked of Clemson and Florida State for good reason. We do have some very important games otherwise in Week 10 in the ACC. So are you two ready to crank it up here with some picks?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. And remind everyone, ACC Breakdown comes your way every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time if you want to watch us live. Obviously, it records, and it's on my YouTube channel at Mark Rogers TV and on various SB Nation sites as well throughout the week, and ready for you to take in your ACC football and get you set for Saturday's games. All right, this is a big one, so you don't need to rip off your prediction. If you have anything to say, especially about this first one, we need to give a little love to Duke, 6-2 and 3-1 in the conference, or are they 7-1 and 4-0 in the conference, taking on North Carolina, who is actually 7-1. We know that. We verified it. And they're 4-0 in the ACC. So your thoughts, Brittany, about Duke and North Carolina? This could be the biggest game in the division this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am the girl that went on record last week and said that Pitt was going to be able to beat UNC and then had to eat crow on Twitter. Yes, yeah.
I did too.
You're very kind to me about it. But I was impressed by what I saw from UNC last week. I really was. We knew that would kind of be a close game, but UNC really pulled away with it. The interesting thing about this is even after last week's debacle in Durham, Duke still sort of controls its own destiny a little bit in this division. If they're able to win, they could end up with a tie, and then Duke plays Pitt the following week. So it's definitely an interesting matchup. I think UNC will be able to win again this week, and there's a great shot to this game.
Okay, Robert, what are your thoughts about North Carolina and Duke, and do you have a pick for us?
Sure. Wake played North Carolina several weeks ago, and they're an excellent team. They're incredibly explosive on the offensive end, and I think the main thing to watch is Carolina's explosiveness versus the ability for Duke to stop the ball. So that's going to be where it's ultimately decided, and I'm going with Carolina on this one.
Okay, Robert, let's stay with you. We got Notre Dame, obviously very highly regarded, the second-rated one-loss team in the country at number 5, having lost just that very close game, had a 2-point conversion to try to go to overtime at Clemson. Going to Pitt, the Panthers, as Brittany outlined for us, had a huge game against North Carolina, so they've dropped back in the race in the division. But could definitely, with one slip up, be right back in it. Notre Dame at 7-1, taking on Pitt. Of course, this is not going to count as a conference game for Pitt, but could get them back on the national map.
I'm going with Notre Dame in this one, but I don't blame you all for picking Pittsburgh last week either. I think they're a very talented team. I think Narduzzi's doing an outstanding job with that program, but I just think Notre Dame has too many athletes in this one, and even though they're playing on the road, they will emerge victorious.
Okay, Brittany, Notre Dame, quite a factor on the national scene at this point, but they have to keep winning. They've got a loss. They go to Pitt.
Yeah, and I agree, Robert. Pat Narduzzi, all credit goes to him for the fact that Pitt's even a part of the conversation at this point, but I think Notre Dame is going to be able to pull past them this weekend. And what's interesting, Notre Dame at this point last year had the same record. They were 7-1 and then went on a losing streak that kind of took them out of contention. I don't see and really hope, because I like when Notre Dame is good, I really hope that the Irish don't go back on that same losing streak at the end of the season. I think the memory of last year will keep them sort of focusing in and following through and getting business done starting this weekend against Pitt.
Yeah, it was those darn Seminoles that sent them on their losing ways last year, and that play at the goal line is what happened there. All right, Brittany, we've got Syracuse taking on Louisville. The Q's coming in at 3-5. They need to win some games to get to postseason play. Louisville, that we expect getting to bowl games typically, but the Cardinals are just 4-4.
Yeah, Louisville, I expected them to be better this year, but I still think Syracuse defense is going to be the reason that they're not going to be able to win, so I'm taking Louisville in this one.
What do you say here, Robert? We got Louisville, who's got a freshman at quarterback who's played rather well. I think their future's bright. They recruit well, very solid on defense, hosting Syracuse. Yeah,
I'm also going to go with Louisville in this one, and I'll also add Wake plays at Notre Dame next week, so their losing streak won't be longer than one if they lose to Pittsburgh this week. But Wake played Louisville this past Friday, and their front seven is outstanding. So I think Syracuse is really going to struggle with that, and as you mentioned, Lamar Jackson, a very mobile quarterback who will give defenses fits. I will also go with Louisville on this one.
Robert, is this what you condition yourself to do when you root for a school like Wake, just to say, it's a foregone conclusion, we lost, I'm not going to get my hopes up? Is that kind of what you do?
It certainly depends on the game. I mean, if there's a game at Notre Dame, I mean, sometimes you try and I mostly in these first few years have looked for week-to-week improvement pretty much, and look at how well we're recruiting compared to how well we have been. And I'm also in graduate school at Vanderbilt right now, so I did not pick the two best schools in terms of football. You mentioned Houston. Yeah, they sort of took it to Vanderbilt pretty recently. But, yeah, I mean, I mostly look for improvement as the season goes along and hope it specifically from younger players.
Well, considering your ties to Wake and going to school at Vanderbilt as well, you definitely have bragging rights, if not during the off season, maybe for the rest of life. If anything else. Maybe just not on college football Saturdays, but I think you're doing okay otherwise.
Oh, thanks.
Maybe not necessarily the eyes of the college football world on this one, aside from people just curious about what Miami's going to do or say. Virginia goes to Miami to take on the Canes, Brittany.
This one was so close to me that I kind of scribbled down one name and scribbled it out and scribbled down another name. I don't know what to think about Miami. I expected last week them to come in a little bit discouraged, and then they hung in there until the end and pulled off a miraculous ending that we're still talking about today on Wednesday. I'm going to give a little bit of an edge to Miami, perhaps just because they might be riding on the adrenaline high of last week. Statistically, I'm dead even on these two teams playing each other, so I'm going to give Miami an edge for adrenaline.
To make you feel a little bit better about the situation, Brittany, I'm guessing nobody's going to come after you for missing the Miami-Virginia pick.
I don't know. Cam might come get me for that.
He'll come get everybody.
Yeah.
All right, Robert, what do you have with the Cavaliers taking on the Canes?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I'm not even sure if Kaya's scheduled to play yet. I know he's still going through that concussion protocol, but on the chance that he does play, I'll go with Miami. I'll take him even if he doesn't. I just don't really believe in Mike London and don't think that program is going too many places under the current leadership. So I'll take Miami in a close one.
Okay, Robert, you two have set it up very nicely for us. Florida State, defending ACC champions, owners of this conference for quite some time, going to Clemson, the #1 team in the nation right now, to take on the undefeated Tigers.
Well, I'm going with Clemson on this one. I think they just have too much offensive firepower. They have arguably the best quarterback in the country, and they're playing at home in an unbelievable environment in Death Valley. So I was very impressed with how they responded to some adversity last week against North Carolina State. But I just think, their offensive firepower combined with the athletes they have on defense, and as well as Cook's potential injury status, I think that's just too much, and I'll take Clemson on this one.
All right, BTN, we got Florida State going to Clemson here.
Yeah, I got to take Clemson on that one as well. I think Deshaun Watson is absolutely unstoppable. I think he's played with a lot of confidence for as young as he is. And I think last week, as Robert started to allude to, when we saw them kind of get that slow start against NC State and the Clemsoning jokes began on Twitter, you saw them overcome that, come out, and then win solidly there at the end. So I think they sort of had their stumble, and they were able to pull past it. So I think that gives them a lot of confidence. They're playing at home. The limited run game for Florida State that we think we might end up with, because we still don't know if Dalvin Cook's going to be back, combined with Clemson's pass defense, I think those are all reasons why the Tigers are going to be able to pull this out and go ahead and start finishing the road to the ACC championship game.
All right, another really nice show in the books. Both of you, fantastic job. Appreciate the time, appreciate the knowledge. We got Brittany Taylor Newman from football.com. And from Blogger So Dear, it's Robert Reinhard talking up some Wake Forest football as well as the entire ACC. I am merely Mark Rogers of Mark Rogers TV. This is ACC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday at 8 o'clock, and this is your place to be if you're a college football fan. Otherwise, you should be ashamed of yourself. So, you two, thank you so much. Great job, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
We'll see you then.